Hi, I'm Dix Bruce, and I want to talk to you about a wonderful series of 3 books. This is an ear training series by Professor Elvo DeMonte. And I took classes from Professor DeMonte in the early 1980s, and they really changed my life, or at least my musical life. And one of the classes was his ear training class. And the way it would work is there was 3 parts to it. One was on hearing scales and tetrachords and modes. The second was on hearing intervals, and the third was on hearing chords. And the way he set the thing up was he would talk about a particular concept, a particular scale, a particular interval or set of intervals, and a particular chord, say. And we talk about that in class, and then he'd send us off to the library to get his tapes, which we could make copies of, and the tapes were drills on whatever we talked about in class. So what I would do is I would often pop these into the cassette player in my car as I drove around, and he would basically play some example, and then he'd give you a couple of seconds to figure out what it was, and then he would tell you. But it was a little bit more informative than even that sounds, because you knew it was going to be, say for the intervals, one of 3 or 4 intervals. So you had a 1 in 4 chance. And what it did is it really made you figure out which needed more work. So if you had to go back to the drawing board and practice this scale or this interval or hearing this chord. And along the way, you really figured out how these things would work. And what I did is we got to be friends, and I still often call him up and ask him particular things about points of music theory or how to explain a certain concept, maybe in one of my books that I'm doing. He's a good friend. And over the years, after I took these classes in the 80s, I said to him, if you ever want to put this ear training thing into a book form, I think it would be really great, and have it available to the general public as opposed to just a college music class. I'd love to be involved in it. And eventually Professor DeMonte called me up and said, I have my series written out, and would you help me do some of the recording? Well, we ended up doing the recordings for the drills, and they ended up filling something like 11 CDs, and they're all in the back of these books, as you can see. Each one has a different number. And it was really great to hear these things again and to be a part of it. But I want to tell you a little bit more about each book and show you the cover of each book and tell you what is involved with them. The first one, of course, is Volume 1, and the specific title of it is Scale Forms Through 6 Basic Tetrachords. And what a tetrachord is a series of 4 notes with different intervals between them. And what DeMonte does is he breaks down every scale, major and minor, pentatonic, and every mode, whether it's Dorian, Phrygian, Mixolydian, whatever. He breaks it down into combinations of these tetrachords. So it's a little hard sometimes to hear a whole scale at once and be able to sing it or identify it. But if you can break it down to hearing these tetrachords, it can really be helpful and useful. So that's what Volume 1 does. Volume 2, its official title is 12 Basic Interval Sounds to Master. And he takes you through all the intervals in the octave and some that are beyond. For example, he'll teach you to hear second, a third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, sixth, seventh octave. And then he teaches you modified versions of those, like minor third or augmented fifth. And the drills are really useful. And one of the things that I learned also in the class is that you start hearing these intervals in different songs maybe that you've heard your whole life and you had no idea what the interval was. For example, swing low, that's a descending major third. Let's see, somewhere over the rainbow. Anyway, the somewhere is an octave, even though I didn't quite sing it perfectly. Might not be as perfect an octave as it should be. Or another one I remember is My Wild Irish Rose. My wild is a major sixth. Now, you don't have to know these things to sing or play, but I've often said it's sort of like learning the name of a bird that's in your neighborhood. Well, not his first name, but his name like a robin or a blue jay or whatever, you might be aware that it's a bird. You might be aware that it's some kind of blue bird or red bird. But once, at least with me, once I know the name of it, I'm seeing them all over the place. And that same thing happened to me with hearing the intervals, the tetrachords, and hearing chords. It was really useful. Now the third volume is called Capturing the Basic Chord Qualities. And what this volume will do will teach you how to spell chords, how to sing chords, and how to recognize chords. And the approach is to start with chords that have, well, all the chords will have C in the bass, but it'll start with the chords that have the root of C in the bass. So that would be all the C chords. And you learn to hear those, to play them, to identify them. Then there would be D chords that have C in the bass, and the C is the seventh. And then, of course, a bunch of chords that have C in the bass as the third, as the fifth, as the seventh, and so on. And it's really amazing. It's really, just to go through the stuff in this volume, you kind of didn't realize that there were that many chords that had C in the bass. I think it was really useful. But anyway, that's volume 3. And again, volume 1 has to do with hearing scales through tetrachords, scales, and modes. Volume 2 is intervals, and volume 3 is chords. Why don't we listen to a sample of one of the drills from volume 2, which is about intervals. And what you're going to hear is Professor DeMonte playing an interval on the piano. And again, you're going to know that it's going to be one of 3 or 4 or 5 intervals, so you're not totally guessing. And then he'll give you a second to write it down on your piece of paper or just to say it out loud, and then he'll remind you what it is. So here's a sample.
CD lesson number 10, study 1, page 51, drill number 2, number 1. Minor 6, number 2. Major 7, number 3. Perfect 4th, number 4. Tritone, number 5. Minor 2nd, number 6.
If you want to find out more about Professor Elvo DeMonte's 3-volume set on ear training, volumes 1, 2, and 3 look like that, you can check them out at my website, www.musicsnow.com.